Today we're talking about common sleep disorders. So to prep for this lesson, it's a good idea if you go into your textbook and fill out the chart in your digital notebook on sleep disorders and then just kind of follow along as I'm giving you an explanation of each of them. We'll start off talking about insomnia. We all from time to time are going to experience difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep, but for people with insomnia, they're experiencing recurring persistent inabilities to fall asleep and stay asleep. It's interesting to note, they actually bring this up in your textbook, that in laboratory studies, people with insomnia do sleep less than others, but they also typically overestimate how long it takes them to fall asleep. And they also underestimate they actually have slept. While sometimes sleeping pills and alcohol, depressants can be described to treat insomnia or to help people sleep, sometimes these have more negative effects than are really worth it. They can cause tolerance, and therefore more of the drug is going to be needed over time in order to produce the same effects. And so doctors are often to try to encourage people to find other ways to help them sleep rather than always just prescribing pills. For individuals with sleep apnea, this is the next disorder that we're going to talk about. They experience periods during the course of the night where they intermittently will stop breathing for up to a minute. What happens with sleep apnea is that the throat muscles and the tongue muscle relax more than normal, and that causes a blockage of the airway. So what happens is, after a person has stopped breathing, maybe for up to a minute, the body's natural response is going to be to rouse them, to wake them up so that they're able to gasp for air. Blood oxygen levels drop during that period of time when they're not breathing. Distress hormones are released, and so the person wakes. But this person can stop breathing again for up to a minute several hundred times during the course of the night. Though they may experience fatigue during the day, they'll have no memories for these periods of time at night when they actually weren't breathing. However, one characteristic symptom of sleep apnea is snoring. So some symptoms, like I said, fatigue, irritability during the day, and there are also other health effects that are associated with sleep apnea, like high blood pressure, for example, that increases the risk of someone having a stroke or a heart attack. A CPAP machine, a continuous positive airway pressure machine, is a machine that is used for people with sleep apnea to keep their airways open during the course of the night while they're sleeping. Narcolepsy is the next disorder that we're going to talk about. I'll get to cataplexy in 1 second, but narcolepsy essentially involves sudden REM sleep attacks throughout the course of the day. So where someone with insomnia is unable to fall asleep, someone with narcolepsy is falling asleep numerous times throughout the course of the day. They're experiencing these periods of very extreme drowsiness that'll cause them to fall asleep. Sometimes narcolepsy is also accompanied by something called cataplexy. Think of it as like a waking form of the muscle paralysis that we said happens during REM sleep. So again, not for everyone with narcolepsy, but for some individuals with narcolepsy, this cataplexy can also be triggered. Some of the triggers for cataplexy include laughing, shouting, sex, and again, it can cause them to lose control of their voluntary muscles and in extreme cases even fall to the ground if it were to affect all of the muscles. Here's an example of what someone looks like without narcolepsy versus an individual with untreated narcolepsy. So narcolepsy is treated probably most commonly using stimulants, but for someone with untreated narcolepsy, this is what their average day may look like. So you could see someone without narcolepsy, being awake through about 2/3 of their day. And this is the sleep cycle that we've already learned about. Whereas someone with narcolepsy is experiencing frequent periods of sleep where they're, again, experiencing a lot of periods in REM sleep. So you can see the really disrupted nature of their sleep and their wakefulness patterns. Night terrors are We see night terrors most commonly in young children. They take place during deep sleep or NREM stage 3 sleep. It's interesting that both night terrors and somnambulism or sleepwalking are common in children, but not really adults. And we think that might be because the amount of NREM 3 sleep that we get decreases as we age. And so we're not in that period of sleep as much where night terrors and sleepwalking tend to happen. So what happens in a night terror, maybe some of you experienced night terrors when you were young, you can ask your parents about it, but essentially a child will wake in the middle of the night just screaming. They are almost impossible to wake during the time that they're experiencing the night terror. And they have no memory of what triggered the night terror when they eventually do wake up. My daughter Elise, my youngest, started experiencing night terrors around the time she turned 2 until she was probably about 3.5. And the first time it happened, I had no idea what it was. I couldn't figure out why she had woken up from a nap and just would not stop screaming. It was horrible. And me not realizing it, I kept trying to wake her. And then when I started reading more about night terrors, I learned that that's actually one of the worst things you could try to do is to wake them up because it only prolongs the night terror. So we had to learn to just let her go. It's a really painful thing as a parent to have to watch them just scream and scream and scream. But we learned that the less we touched her and the less we tried to wake her, the shorter the night terror would persist. There is this really cool contraption. We never had to buy it because hers stopped. That will actually, it goes under the child's mattress and it learns the patterns of their sleep. It learns the point in their sleep cycle where they tend to experience the night terror and will gently emit like enough of a motion to rouse them without fully waking them. And it'll rouse them just enough right before the night terror that it'll prevent the night terror from happening. So that's, I believe it's called the Lully. That's a pretty cool device that's out there on the market now. I just include this because to show you just how loud a night terror can get. This was my husband's Apple Watch when my daughter was experiencing a night terror. So you could see that she hit 90 decibels with her screaming in the midst of her night terror. Sleep paralysis is something we can talk about a little bit more together, not a sleep disorder per se, but some of you, like me, may have experienced sleep paralysis where you wake during REM sleep when your voluntary muscles are still paralyzed. So you wake up, your eyes are able to move around, but the rest of your body is unable to move. It can be a very scary sensation, but I think the best advice is to just close your eyes and go back to sleep, and you'll wake and you'll be able to move. Some triggers for sleep paralysis, and I know that this is absolutely true for me, is increased stress, irregular sleep patterns, and sleep deprivation. I notice that in times in my life where I'm really experiencing a lot of stress and my anxiety is high, I do tend to be more prone to experiencing sleep paralysis. And then REM sleep disorder, we've already talked about, I think in our last video, we said that this is when individuals are not experiencing muscle paralysis during REM sleep, and it may result in them actually getting up and acting out their dreams.